Well, good evening, and thank you very much for those generous introductions and inviting me here this evening. It's actually an honour to speak in front of a group of business leaders. So I'm Mivy James, and I'm the Head of Consulting for National Security and Defence at BAE Systems Applied Intelligence, which is quite a mouthful, I admit. I'm based in the southeast, and as you heard, I'm here today because I've also been giving a talk at the Three Counties Defence and Security Expo. I've got some notes with me, partly so that I don't get confused and start telling you about the wonders of wearable tech and how it could save the Ministry of Defence mind-boggling amounts of money, but also because the topic of women in leadership is very personal to me. So I certainly have a lot of opinions on this and need to try and keep to the point. In addition to my official business role then, I'm the chair of our Gender Balance Network, which I founded just over 2 years ago, amongst some controversy, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. This network now has a global membership of over 200 and is growing every single week, and it's something I'm actually really proud of. So I'd like to focus this talk today on how businesses can increase the number of women who have what I call a seat at the table. So in other words, sufficient seniority and influence in the direction of running the business. So what I was intending to do is draw some attention to some of the barriers to success that women face regularly and some requests of you to help overcome them. I very much want to emphasise, because this is going to sound a little bit grim, that despite all of the challenges, I really enjoy working and I wouldn't swap my field of technology for anything else. In a very timely fashion, the Hampton Alexander Review published an update this morning, so I've scribbled down some notes on that, and this is being published quite widely across government. The Hampton Alexander Review does an annual report with the FTSE companies to look at the number of women that they have on their boards, and it calls for a third of FTSE leadership positions to be occupied by women by 2020. Now that sounds like an ambitious goal initially, but actually when you realise that women are half the population, aiming for a third seems pretty low. But there has been some progress. All male FTSE 350 boards fell from 152 in 2011 to just 10 in 2017. Yet some of the excuses for not having a better gender balance on boards are absolutely mind-boggling. I've included some of them here because I think it reinforces some of the points that I want to make later on. These are very weak excuses. So apparently women don't fit comfortably into the boardroom room. There aren't many women with the right creds and experience. The issues covered are complex. Perhaps our little lady brains can't quite manage to think that cleverly. Most women don't want the hassle or pressure of sitting on a board, and actually I heard this from a women in tech conference I went to from a woman who was sitting on a board, which I found extremely irritating. Shareholders aren't bothered, so why should we be? Actually, that's not true either. Only last week, we won a major piece of work for the Navy. One of the scoring criteria in the procurement process was the diversity of the team. Now, our data science team happens to be led by a woman, and our panel that went along to present was 50-50. Now, I haven't had the scoring details back yet, so I don't know how much of an edge that gave us, but it certainly was a contributing factor to us winning our business. So if you don't believe it's the right thing to do, then there are certainly sound business reasons to do it anyway. Someone else said, well, my other board colleagues just wouldn't want to appoint a woman. All the good women have already been snapped up, because clearly there aren't that many of us. We have one woman already, so we're done. It's someone else's turn now. Surely one woman's enough, we're only half the population after all. Or we need to build the pipeline from the bottom. There just aren't enough women in this sector. And that's something I hear a lot in my technology industry, where I can't appoint a woman just because I want to. What I'm quite pleased to see is some of the comments, some of the responses to these excuses, which I hope will shame people into behaving differently. Business Minister Andrew Griffiths said, "These are pitiful and patronising excuses, and they're just not acceptable. Our most successful companies in the UK are those that champion diversity." So that's pretty much hot off the press today, but it reinforces most of the things that I want to talk about. It's actually only very recently that I've become a vocal advocate for increasing the number of women in the STEM industries, as well as increasing the number of women in leadership. I feel a little bit embarrassed about this, that I didn't take a stand sooner, given that I've been a tech professional for almost 25 years now, and was one of a very small number of women on my computer science degree all those years ago. You might ask why I've been silent for so long, and it's complicated and rather a paradox, so I'm going to explain it as it goes a long way to understanding why so few women are still willing to raise issues of sexism in the workplace. It's important to note that I don't particularly blame workplaces. We still live in a very sexist society today in many ways. Just by being a female technologist, I already stand out from the crowd. In any meeting or team, I'm usually the minority. So if I stand up and say, I believe I'm being treated differently because of my gender, I want to be treated the same, I'm drawing more attention to myself, drawing more attention to the fact that I'm a woman and to the differences, and possibly be perceived as playing the woman card to progress my career. And I've been painfully conscious of tokenism. I have never ever wanted to be given a role, job or promotion just because I am a woman, or the best female programmer, but because I'm the best person, the best human being for that job. And I've really wanted the workplace to be a true meritocracy, but the reality is that it's far from that. We all have our unconscious biases where we're more likely to favour those who think like us. It's very flattering when someone says to you, great minds think alike. I also probably suffer a little bit from imposter syndrome, making me reluctant to put myself out there as a role model. I worry about the, oh, hark at her, who does she think she is, type comments. More than once in the past, I declined to be the poster girl on a recruitment brochure or be the face of something or other because I wanted to be valued for my intellect rather than just my fashion sense or blonde hair. So something did make me change my mind in the end, to put myself out there, lean in, and be the poster girl for women in tech after all. I can't quite put my finger on what it is, but it was definitely related to becoming a mother. I started thinking about future generations and noticing how the gender ratio in tech hadn't improved since I first started out. If anything, it seems to have gotten worse in more technical roles. There are fewer female programmers today than there were in the 1980s. The number of women in leadership roles in big companies hasn't dramatically increased with my generation reaching the right level of experience. My mother's generation, by comparison, was allowed to work, but not really encouraged to have serious careers. My mother said she became a teacher because that's what women were expected to do. It's an acceptable role for a middle-class, educated woman. And I desperately wanted things to be different for the 20-somethings joining the workplace now. And perhaps most of all, some of my own experiences during pregnancy, maternity leave and return to work made me see the world through a different lens. During my 20s, I was told several times by male peers that I was all right as I wasn't really like other girls. I was really one of the lads. This was of course meant as a great compliment, as I was accepted into the team rather than being excluded from it just because of my gender. My general geekiness, interest in all things science and engineering, especially cars, sports adventuring, driving style, and ability to quick-fire banter ensured I was seen in a different light, although I never came to like football. The reality is that this view shows how deeply ingrained sexist thinking is. By not conforming to these artificial gender norms of what it is to be female, I was somehow considered to be superior to traditionally feminine women. And this lodged somewhere in the very back of my brain, and I spent many years subconsciously dialing down the feminine and even dressing androgynously to be accepted and taken seriously, and I realise now that that was a travesty. And how shamefully sexist of me. During this stage of my life, I even started finding it hard to form female friendships, as I had successfully absorbed so many masculine traits to emulate the men I worked with to fit in. And one day I caught myself buying yet another trouser suit, black of course, the pantsuit now made famous by Hillary Clinton, and had some kind of epiphany. I was literally hiding my true colours, so I went off and bought a red dress instead. Women in very male-dominated teams are seen as different and are probably not socially included and therefore not completely included in the team. I was late to motherhood and had my son shortly before my 41st birthday, positively geriatric first-time mother in the eyes of the health service. And I didn't delay motherhood for my career, but delaying my motherhood did mean that my career benefited, so I was pretty senior by this point in my life. I was actually a few weeks pregnant when I interviewed for the head of consulting role that I now hold, and actually really couldn't tell you whether I would have gone ahead with it had I known I was expecting at the time. On the confirmation of my pregnancy, my first thought work-wise was that I felt fraudulent. that my management would feel irritated with me, and all those men who went head to head with me through the competitive process would be extremely resentful. That's exactly what happens when you let a woman into the job. She then goes off and has a baby 6 months into it. How rude. And if that's true, they all hid it very well. Actually, it turned out everybody was very supportive, and one of my competitors was delighted to take my role on temporarily during maternity leave, and he got a promotion at the end of it for his troubles. And having children, it's very important to note, is not a selfish act. The human race still needs women to have babies in order to survive. And what really triggered me into founding our gender balance network and taking action was someone saying to me on my return to work after maternity leave, "I suppose your career is on the back burner now that you're a mother." I was absolutely seething. I was already pretty senior at the time, and was utterly astonished that a colleague would hold such a view in the 21st century, and I was completely maddened and flummoxed as to why somebody would think that way. It's not true that I had to hand over my ambition and half my brain in order to get my baby back when I left the hospital. And what I have noticed, since fully demonstrating my femininity through motherhood and working 4 days a week, is an increase in being patronised, and some folks feeling the need to protect me from anything too challenging, otherwise known as interesting or a stretch activity that could actually further my career development. So in the workplace, women are made to feel guilty about having babies and working, and may even hold themselves back. Others may make decisions for them with the best intentions that actually exclude them from giving their full contribution. And all of this predates the mandatory gender pay gap reporting. I'm sure you'll all agree that published reports are quite an eye-opener. I've been shocked by the size of the gap in many companies. Many companies have been ready to blame the large gaps and the lack of women in their industry and on pipelines, particularly true for STEM. However, some very traditionally male-dominated organisations, such as the military and police, have almost no gender pay gap, despite women representing only a small portion of their workforces, so they're not struggling with that leaky pipeline. And this demonstrates that even with a gender imbalance, women can be evenly represented across all grades. When I first saw what was going to be mandated by this reporting, I was very sceptical as to whether it would actually make any difference and drive change. But I'm delighted to see the amount of discussion it has generated and look forward to seeing positive action and seeing some of those gaps close in next year's reporting. It's worthwhile being aware of how the publication of this data has made many women feel, which is undervalued and extremely cheated. Much is made of addressing the pipeline, particularly in STEM industries. There's a plethora of schemes aimed at improving the take-up of science and tech subjects by girls. Employers are supportive of these schemes, as well as holding their own initiatives. Across BAE systems, we do a huge amount to encourage STEM outreach for all, with an additional emphasis on girls, which actually meets resistance in many quarters, interestingly, to mitigate gender stereotypes that deter girls from this field. However, I don't believe that achieving parity at entry-level career grades with the next generation is enough on its own to ensure that future company boards typically have an even split of men and women. Today's workplace culture drives many women out before they've reached senior management level, let alone leadership grades. And I'm conscious that I might sound quite negative during this. I've noticed a great deal of resistance to accepting some of these issues as reality. Earlier, when I said that I was rebellious when I founded our gender balance network, there were cries of, "But what about the men?" Or lots of, "There are absolutely no problems here. We definitely don't have any diversity issues in this organisation," looking around a room of white men. It's naive to think that any workplace is completely inclusive all of the time, especially when we're constantly bombarded with deeply sexist views of the world wherever we look. It's impossible to kind of park all of those messages when we come through the door to our office buildings. When I told some friends what I was talking about this evening, they were really eager to know whether I would be including any of their own anecdotes in an anonymised fashion, which I have. It's puzzling to see an almost linear decrease in the percentage of women career grade by career grade in large corporations. So in my sort of reporting line, if you like, I see this sort of straight drop-off as you go up through the grades. One theory that's often touted is that all of those women are leaving the workforce to become stay-at-home mothers. However, women are 51% of the population and 46% of the workforce in the UK. So if women do take time out to look after children, it's rarely indefinite. So where on earth are all these talented women hiding? Some companies are worrying about this lack of women in senior management and leadership roles, as they typically see they have a better gender balance at the lower grades and jobs occupied by younger people. Quite a few are introducing reverse or reciprocal mentoring schemes, where leaders are paired with these junior women. Whilst it might seem like a sensible thing to do, it won't have any positive impact on diversity at more senior levels at any time soon. Many of those women will have left before reaching that level. It also shows that the few women who have reached senior management are kind of being overlooked and stepped over for that mentoring. There are a number of reasons why this female brain drain happens, and there's no single silver bullet for fixing it all. One is a lack of senior role models. It means a great deal for younger women to have senior female role models for inspiration. If there aren't many, or she suspects that there's a glass ceiling in place, she won't be confident about her own longer-term career prospects. So we have this awkward catch-22 situation. The best way of increasing the number of senior women in business is to increase the number of senior women in business, or at least make those who are around be more visible. And by senior women, I mean those who have a seat at the table and are clearly demonstrating that they are in a position of influence. Many, not all, though, women do have children, and we still live in a world where mothers tend to carry the main burden for childcare and household responsibilities. Some of the most successful businesswomen in the world have got to where they have, without having children or achieving a reversal of the traditional gender role models in their families. Until we have more business leaders who take an even share in household and family duties, workplaces are unlikely to truly support flexible working. I happen to be one of the most senior women in my part of BAE systems, and an even rarer beast by being a mother. Younger women ask me for advice on this matter, and then I go to great lengths to explain that my husband and I share domestic responsibilities between us. Each week we go through this rather laborious process of diary matching to ensure the nursery runs are covered. And I also share this with male colleagues when they're wondering what can be done about the gender gap. What I notice is some of them then get deeply uncomfortable because they realise that their own careers are facilitated by their partners sacrificing theirs to take on the lion's share of family responsibility. And although he's not here today, I would like to let my husband know that he's appreciated. Of course, he's at home with our son right now. To me, this shouldn't be an unusual arrangement, but you'd be surprised by how many people can't get their heads around it. Often when I'm at an evening work event, at least one person will ask me in a panicky way, "But who's looking after your son?" Even those who know that I'm not a single parent still ask it. And I'm sorely tempted to do this dramatic thing of looking at my watch, swearing and go, "Ethan, I'm coming for you," and running off for the train station, because they clearly think that I've left him to fend for himself. I find it really puzzling and point out that my husband is doing it. And then you get the odd response, like, "Oh, so he's babysitting," or "daddy daycare," which I think is a very peculiar way of thinking. It's just parenting. And my husband actually finds it offensive that his parenting skills are in doubt. In fact, only this morning, when I was at the Three Counties Defence Expo, somebody asked me, "Who's looking after your son?" Very, very odd thing to be thinking, I think, suddenly panicking about my childcare arrangements. I know from my peers that it's very common for women to feel more excluded once they've returned from maternity leave. As people make decisions on their behalf about what they do and don't want to do work-wise, it's particularly common in consulting, because there's the assumption that a woman does not want to work away from her base location. And normally when I ask the women what they want to do, they say that they will make it work for the right role. Parents face additional challenges due to the uncertainty of taking time out, particularly when they've had to take an extended parental leave. Wondering what life's going to be like when they've come through the huge change that is parenthood and adjusting back into the workplace. I definitely had a big wobble as to whether I still was needed, or whether I was capable of doing it. I took 8 months of maternity leave, and yet still had a lot of change in that relatively short time. It happens incrementally to those who are in the workplace every day, and it's easy to forget what the biggest changes are. A simple fix would be to run through the headline changes that have taken place during someone's absence on their return to work. One of my shocks was that my managing director had changed whilst I was off. Earlier, I referred to the gender paradox. This is a contributing factor in women not coming forward and raising issues. I know that there are things in my own past that I really should have raised formally, but didn't want to attract negative attention to myself. I didn't want to be seen as being difficult or a troublemaker. And I was also concerned that I wouldn't be believed, or the impact that it had on me would be played down, otherwise known as gaslighting. Sexual harassment is real and all too common. It's probably easier for this to be believed these days, as the world's been recently very shocked by the scale of the #MeToo reveal. In my younger days, I was harassed more than once in the workplace, and did tackle it directly with the individuals concerned. I remember one chap being really shocked, and his defence was, "No one else has complained, so clearly I was uptight." When I pointed out that almost all of the women in our small office disliked his advances and felt deeply uncomfortable when he touched them, he then took it upon himself to confront a few other women round the building. He was then deeply upset when they all agreed with me, and very shocked, and many of those women came to thank me for confronting him. So it's essential for companies to create a really open culture where everyone's comfortable with raising concerns and has the confidence they will be dealt with confidentially, with empathy and with integrity. I've noticed that since I created the Gender Balance Network, more women, and interestingly BAME staff, have increased confidence in raising examples of where they're not being included or on the receiving end of derogatory banter. This isn't because there's been an increase in this behaviour, but instead people know that they can raise these things rather than do the usual thing of just find another job. And it's important not to underestimate the impact of this non-inclusive behaviour. Someone I know recently became so anxious that she was hospitalised for a short period due to harassment that amounted to bullying that she was receiving. I myself was stalked by a colleague for a period of a few months, but it really felt like a lifetime. And it was actually quite a frightening time. It's given that his boundaries were in a very different place to mine, and he was unable to tell the difference between a polite and friendly good morning and someone who wanted to have a relationship with him. I couldn't tell what he was going to do next. It all came to a head when he contacted me repeatedly on the phone, personal email, work email, and social media, all over the course of one Sunday morning. I studiously ignored all of these contacts and ended up with an essay being sent my way about how we needed to talk about us. There was no us, nothing close to it. And yet I was still reluctant to raise it, as I was concerned somehow that I was at fault, that I had invited that behaviour, that I had given off the wrong signals. Eventually, I pretty much had a rant at a team meal because I was actually affecting my work. I was finding it distracting. I was making me stressed. And a senior colleague, who happened to be a retired police officer, was superb at handling the sensitive situation. And he really demonstrated the right level of emotional intelligence for giving me the support I needed. I would have had grounds for raising a formal grievance, but still decided against it. And I couldn't really tell you why. Part of me actually regrets it, because I now have a better understanding of the hidden extent of this sort of behaviour. On the other hand, men can really make a positive difference to drive change in the workplace culture. In BAE systems, we often have teams working on client sites who have to stay away from home in hotels. One team member was recently in that situation and phoned me up. She was very upset to overhear a contractor say to his mates something along the lines of, "Quo, look at the legs on that," as she walked through the canteen. She articulated it very well and said it made her feel like an animal in the zoo, and doubt that those individuals had any respect for anything that she had to say in meetings. And she was holding some extremely serious meetings and dealing with hundreds of stakeholders across that organisation. We talked it through, and I pointed her in the direction of our project manager on site, who deftly had a word with the individuals concerned, which resulted in an apology. The contractor in question was deeply ashamed of his behaviour, especially as he had a daughter of the same age as my colleague. The other option that I was faced with was removing her from the client site, thus hampering her own career development and choosing not to put any other young women on that particular client site. And I'm glad I didn't do that, because she did such a sterling job that she got a promotion directly as the result of the work on that project. But I promise that I will get on to some practical action so that we can finish on a more positive note, but there's just one more topic that I need to get out of the way, which is everyday sexism. This final piece is a major factor in women leaving companies to be self-employed. Not only does being self-employed provide a great deal of autonomy with regards to flexible working, but it also means that you no longer have to run the gauntlet of subtle yet persistent challenges that make it all the harder to have a seat at the table. And rather than just rely on my own observations and opinions that I've gathered through my gender balance network on what everyday sexism is, I've backed it up with some research. I find the Harvard Business Review a really useful resource for workplace evidence on inclusion. Women are more likely to be interrupted or cut off when speaking in meetings. A particular favourite is for their opinion to be repeated by someone else verbatim and for it to receive nods of approval all round. This actually happened to me in an internal strategy meeting some while ago, and I'm still seething from it. I was actually really tempted to work out of the workshop, I was so cross. Amplification can reduce the impact of this where someone notices it taking place and calls it out. For example, saying, "That's what Mivy said," or "As Mivy said." Some of my colleagues, and including some of my male colleagues, are getting really good at supporting their female peers in this way. Being patronised is fairly common. I often get protected from the technical details by very thoughtful people in meetings in case my little lady brain can't quite manage it, despite probably being the most technically experienced and qualified person in the room. My personal strategy for dealing with that is to ask a very insightful question or make an observation early on in the meeting, even if I don't really need to, in order to evidence my technical credentials. And still there are some people that I avoid interacting with because I'm often left feeling like I'm the child, even though there's no age gap, or actually I may have more work experience than they do. I haven't yet got a strategy for dealing with that situation. Sometimes there's a desire to fix the women. I owned Sheryl Sandberg's book Lean In for quite a long time before I actually got round to reading it, as I took a dislike to the title. I assumed it was all about getting women to behave more like men in order to progress their careers, to emulate masculine traits, which doesn't sound much like diversity of thought to me, and I was really glad to discover my assumption wasn't quite right when I finally got round to reading it. However, I often get asked to mentor or guide other women because she lacks confidence. When I meet with said woman, I don't see a lack of confidence at all. I see a very strong, independent, capable woman. I suspect that the referrer is the one who lacks confidence in her. So let's stop thinking about how to fix the women and instead concentrate on creating inclusive meritocracies where everyone is able to perform at their best. The Harvard Business Review ran a study on whether men and women behave differently at work and tested a number of common held theories as to what holds women back. This included speaking less in meetings and spending less time interacting with seniors, which are both indicators of confidence. Their research showed that there was actually no difference in behaviour, but a great difference in how behaviour was perceived. Then there's the classic too emotional for leadership belief. You must all have seen some of the really disgusting comments made about Hillary Clinton when she ran for presidency, that she wasn't fit for office because women are emotional or too hormonal. And look at what the US got, for goodness sake. A man driven entirely by emotion. And I personally have no desire to work with a bunch of autonomans. I much prefer to work with those who have real passion for their field. Men and women typically exhibit emotion differently to each other due to our social conditioning, yet men aren't viewed as emotionally fragile or volatile creatures if they get angry. And on a very serious note, men being discouraged from talking about their feelings is a major contributing factor to suicide, being the biggest cause for men in their 20s. Female suicide is extremely rare by comparison. Therefore, we can easily conclude that repressing emotion is a very negative thing. Harvard Business Review, yet again, did some research into leadership descriptors applied to men and women, grouping them by positive and negative. Overwhelmingly, the words used to describe male leaders in that research were positive, strong, competent, and so forth. Women, negative, bossy, controlling, emotionally unstable. This links very nicely to my next point, that women tend to be lumped together as a single unit, whereas men get to be treated as individuals. If one man behaves in a certain way, be it good or bad, he is seen as an independent being who has done his own thing. Employers don't assume that all men have the same career aspirations or interests and so on. And yet, very curiously, the remaining half of the population is lumped together as if we were of one hive mind. Women are individuals too and must be treated as such. We're never the right age either. Women get called girls even when we're not that young, and are told that we aren't ready or senior enough for a particular task or to interact with a senior client, for example, but their male peers are likely to be given a shot. Then suddenly women find themselves middle-aged, and it's assumed that they've chosen not to progress their career any further, and they get overlooked in the promotion process. And I promise them that this is my last negative point. Our society expects women to undertake emotional labour for free. In other words, it's not rewarded. Women in work often find themselves being sought out as a sympathetic ear and doing some counselling, expected to arrange the community projects and events such as team socials, remembering birthdays, or organising a leaving collection. In fact, there's no scientific evidence from psychologists to back up the generally accepted thought that women are more empathetic than men. Once when I was on a team of design authorities, where of course everyone else was a man, I fell into this trap of being the social secretary for somehow. So I took to arranging social events at venues that I really wanted to go to, beautiful cocktail bars across London, and there were many, many grumbles that I couldn't find any real L pubs, but I made the point of saying that it was the organisers' prerogative and they could really take over the duties if that's what they wanted to do. And if anyone saw my insights profile, for those who don't know, it's a little bit like a Myers-Briggs thing. They really wouldn't expect me to be a sympathetic ear. My profile says quite the opposite. Female leaders are often expected to act in the interests of the community rather than their own career development. In fact, they're even expected to sacrifice the latter for the greater good. And we expected to bring in the cakes or do the workplace housekeeping, more often male peers are. Or indeed, provide paracetamol when needed. As I was told last week, women carry that stuff around in their handbags. I'm not actually the team mother, I get enough of that at home. All of these challenges mean that women leave companies to become self-employed, often collaborating with other self-employed women on projects and business ideas. I've the honour of being an inspiring creator in one such network in Surrey, and I love the way that these small businesses really support each other. That all sounds rather dreary, but I don't think it is, as things are getting better, and I've squashed a lot into a small amount of time. And things are improving, but too slowly for my liking. Part of me regrets starting my gender balance network and taking this challenge on, because it's unlike any other project that I've ever done. There's no real end in sight, and it's difficult to determine how much of my time and energy to invest in it, with so little return, but I do hope that I'm making some kind of difference. So what can business leaders do to speed up that change? So I have a number of questions to ask businesses. Are the senior women in your business given encouragement and support to be role models, visible role models? The visibility matters, as you can't be what you can't see, and it's important for both genders to see that women in leadership is normalised. What support does your company provide with regards to carer responsibilities? It's not just for mothers, or mothers and fathers, but for all carers, for example, those who care for an elderly relative, which is becoming increasingly common these days. Do you have a returners programme, or at least ease those who've taken extended leave back into work by giving them a crash course on what's new? It seems like such a simple solution, but doesn't seem to happen. Do you have male leaders who set an example by taking on childcare responsibilities? Remember that dads don't babysit, they dad. And are you really supportive of flexible working? There are many reasons why both men and women of all ages benefit from flexible working. It's not just down to parenting, and it's becoming a big trend these days. Do you have a scorecard to measure diversity and inclusion? In BAE Systems, we've created a diversity toolkit that provides a qualitative measure as well as the quantitative figures, which cover the D but not the I of D&I. Have you rolled out unconscious bias training at all levels with a particular focus on managers? And would your managers know what to do if someone had a concern? Those conversations can be deeply uncomfortable and people aren't well equipped to handle them. The number one tip is to first listen and empathise. What often happens is people get brushed off and therefore they don't take it any further. A colleague of mine complained about some sexist comments on client site, and the response that she got was, "That's pretty woman troubles." So she didn't take it any further, and a couple of months later really regretted her decision. And have you even tried implicit bias testing to understand your own unconscious biases? Do you have a business model that enables you to work in a flexible way with the self-employed, partnering with startups to diversify the supplier base? And what visibility and support do you give women in middle management? This is the dangerous drop-off ground where women either get stuck or leave the business. Are they being invested in? Are they being mentored and sponsored to have stretch goals? And are you making assumptions about what women want, treating them as a collective, and overlooking them? And finally, when doing succession planning, promotion rounds and recruitment and pay rises, do you have checks in place to ensure all of these take place in a meritocracy? I encourage managers to do what they would have done anyway, and then go back and check before finalising. For example, are all of my potential successors that I've identified clones of me? If 25% of my entry-level recruitment is female, does it follow that 25% of promotion to the next grade is also female? If it's significantly less, there's something going wrong. And in fact, in our most recent pay round, in my part of the business, we did look at some of these figures just to check that things were being done fairly. Some big discrepancies, historical discrepancies, were rectified. So I realise I've shared a huge amount with you, but I hope it's given you some food for thought and some constructive ideas to take forward.